Welcome back to the fourth episode of High Frequencies Podcast. I'm Jordan from Brooklyn.
And I'm Jamal from Los Angeles.
And today we're going to be discussing EQ.
This podcast is sponsored by JMBK Audio. Head over to jmbkaudio.wordpress.com for all your mixing and mastering needs. On another note, you can check out my co-host Jordan's music under the name Zybrium at soundcloud.com/XYBRIUM.
Thanks, Jamal.
You're very welcome.
Welcome back. Now, let's discuss audio news. We got a lot of cool things that have happened recently in the audio world. So I wrote some things down to discuss. Serato, the DJ software, has just created a free library of visual packs for live streaming, since a lot of people are live streaming. You can use this with Serato Video or Twitch or any other kinds of streaming services you might be using. They've also created a Twitch extension that can be used to overlay Serato information onto your Twitch stream. This is really awesome for displaying all the track information and a lot of live things for your watchers. Additionally, Spotify is launching a new high-quality streaming service quite similar to Tidal's current high-quality streaming service. This will include FLAC or WAV files. They haven't specified. I would assume FLAC, but it will be streaming in a higher bit rate. This will be giving you more information per second and resulting in a more quality listening experience. That's it for audio news.
Awesome. So today we're going to be getting into equalization. That actually, just to talk about some audio news, the biggest issue that I've always had with Spotify is that the quality is terrible. So it's really good that they're adding in some hi-fi elements.
Yeah, that's going to be really awesome. I had Tidal for a little while, and when you could use Tidal and Serato and you could combine them to DJ, it was pretty cool. But it needed internet, so that was a little...
That's always iffy in nightclubs.
For sure. But, you know, it's we'll see how this Spotify turns out. That's pretty exciting, and I'm definitely going to give it a shot.
Yeah, me too.
So today we have a really cool episode. Giving you a quick rundown, we're going to be discussing EQ today. We're going to be discussing tone control, or just how to control your sound using EQs, kind of what they are. We're also going to be giving some technical information about them. And then finally, we're going to be leading on with some techniques, some stories, some experiences that me and Jamal have had with EQs in general. So get excited. This is going to be an action-packed episode. Let's go.
Most definitely. So
Jamal, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
In your own words, what do you think of when you hear the word EQ? What is it to you? What is an EQ, and where do you find it?
So for me, an EQ, I guess from a more consumer perspective, the most way that most people are familiar with EQs is in their cars. So you have that tonal control in your car where you have the bass, the mids, and the treble. That's an equalizer. That's an EQ. That's a specific type of EQ, but that's probably what most people are familiar with. But from a music production perspective, EQs are a specialized type of filter that allows you to kind of control the tones in your different sounds that you have going on in your music. So for example, like say you have a guitar melody that's following along with like a piano melody for some reason. If you have those two instruments, they live in the same frequency range, and you can they kind of mask each other. They kind of fight with each other for the same frequency space. You can use an EQ to basically carve each one out of space so that you can hear the separate instruments individually. And that's really, to me, what an EQ really is. And when it comes to mixing, an EQ is probably like 90% of the tool that I use while mixing.
For sure. For sure. I remember my first experience with an EQ, just being, like you said, in the car. I think that's generally everybody's. If any experience, that's everybody has experienced some kind of an EQ in the car.
Definitely.
Now, as a kid, I remember trying to turn up the volume to make it more bassy, right? Or to make something else come out. Now, the problem with the volume knob is it also hurts your ears with the cymbals or
Mhm.
other things that get turned up with the single knob.
Everything. Yeah.
So when I discovered, whoa, there's a way to only turn up the bass, or wow, there's only a way to turn up this specific area or turn down maybe a specific area,
Mhm.
that to me was my first experience with an EQ, and it kind of registered, oh, they're little separate volume controls
Yeah.
on a small scale, three separate volume controls that sort of inhabit the areas that people are most aware of in the
Yeah.
mid range, the high range, and the low range.
Yeah.
And that, and a consumer perspective, is something that I feel allows people to kind of get into, or at least be exposed to, an EQ
Yeah.
and audio engineering in general.
Yeah.
Now, in terms, like you said, with using it in mixing, this is one of the most important tools, as we'll discuss, when you are mixing, because it can help things sit together with other things that
Yeah.
naturally wouldn't fit well.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And that's what we mean when we say tonal control. Is
For
that not
sure.
necessarily that we're changing like the notes per se or the actual like pitch of something that's being played? Like if you're playing in a C minor, it still is going to play in C minor. We're just talking about spectral on the terms of a frequency spectrum controlling the volume level across different frequencies.
For sure. And that's another point to think about, is sometimes you might even remove, as we'll discuss, different frequencies from a spectrum with
Hmm.
this EQ, leaving other frequencies intact,
Yeah,
as we'll look at. And this is a really
exactly.
cool way to fit things together, kind of like a puzzle. And EQ lets you do that.
Yeah,
And you'll notice it on a small scale just in the car, just
yeah,
so you can inhabit the car, so
yeah.
you can crank up the music and not have it hurt your ears. You've created space for you, in a sense, using an
Yeah.
EQ.
Or you can just turn up the bass. I've seen those videos, those like viral videos of the people who have the subs in their car and they just crank the bass and the whole
For
car is
sure.
shaking.
Yep. I remember in college, my friend in college had a huge trunk rattle sub kind of thing.
Ooh, yeah.
We were in audio engineering school, so we'd put in our earplugs and then
Mm-hmm.
we just like
Smart.
crank it and just
Yeah.
drive down the street like that.
Yeah,
I'm not
that's
sure if
smart.
it helps with the earplugs, but it
I
was
mean,
very fun.
the subs, you definitely got to protect your ears with subs because they're some of the loudest sounds.
Yeah, for sure.
So what are some of your basic ways that you use an EQ?
Well, some of the basic ways that I like to use EQs
Mm-hmm.
is when I'm mixing
Mm-hmm.
or when I'm creating. And what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by those two things, you could say creating is music production. But
Yeah.
so if I'm building a bass sound in a synthesizer, or even playing a guitar with some distortion on it,
Mm-hmm.
what I will most likely reach for or think of next is an EQ. And the reason for this is going to be to sort of personalize, control the sound that it's going to make, or in physical terms, we could say, control the precise volume that each frequency will register. And this is a form of sound design on a
Yeah.
production level. So when I'm producing, I find myself using EQs in a sense to create sounds or sound design in a filtering kind of way, to either remove or boost specific frequencies. And then when I'm mixing, I'll find myself, as we discussed, using it to make room for things, to
Yeah.
make small things highlighted and other things more reserved in the mix, and generally a much more pleasurable listening experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually use that a lot in sound design because
Mhm.
as you know, I'm a bass music producer,
Yep.
and in a lot of like bass sound design specifically, how you get those kinds of like turning a synth sound into like almost like a talking bass sound, that's through EQing. That's mostly how I do it, is through using EQs and filters or both together. And
Hmm.
that's kind of how I usually will create a sound, is like EQing heavily and doing it wrong to a certain degree, quote unquote wrong. And that's one of the ways that I sound design and use things from scratch.
For sure. It's like a tongue and lips. I mean, that's
Yeah, yeah,
essentially an EQ.
yep,
So on a level of a vocalist, not that I am one, but a vocalist would think of themselves, their lips and
yeah.
their tongue, as a physical form of
As
EQ,
an
I
EQ,
guess. Yeah.
exactly.
So
That's how
so I
words
do
form.
I do see your point when it comes to bass design. I think of it a lot like lips and tongue,
Yeah,
when you're
yeah,
making a bass sound. And these we'll get into as we progress in today's episode as well.
yeah, definitely.
So when it comes to another way that I like to use EQs, it's to just plain old filter. I'll use a single band. Now EQs are divided, multiple housing. We can think of them as multiple filters inside of something called an equalizer, right?
Yes.
So I'll use a specific filter, just a single band, to remove information a lot, and that could be even when I don't like to, but if I'm recording with a vocalist who
Mm-hmm.
isn't necessarily trained or doesn't care, and they just to make sure they don't kick the mic stand or to do something that can introduce low frequencies,
Yeah.
you could remove things below 75 or something. But typically, it's a good idea to do that after the recording.
Yeah, yeah. Usually you want to wait. You don't want to record with the filter on, even though a lot of modern microphones have that little high pass filter on there.
Hmm. And consoles as well, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of consoles have that high pass filter on the
Mhm.
record stage. Most of the time, I usually wait until after the recording because then
For
you
sure.
could lose some of that tonal information in their voice, especially if they have a deeper voice.
For sure. I find a lot of those buttons are used more for live application.
Yeah.
So you can just not have those frequencies live,
Yeah.
super loud.
Yeah, that makes way more sense.
For sure, for sure. But it's there if you need it. If you want to reamp, like rerun the signal back through a console or back through something else, you can always do that later on in the mix.
Yeah.
They're great. They're probably my number one tool that I use in all of music in
Yeah.
general because
Yeah.
I'm always using it. Like there's not
Yeah,
a single
definitely.
instance where I'm not.
There's
And
honestly,
that's
like, there's a way where you can save default tracks on different DAWs. On my default track for Ableton and for Logic, there's always an EQ loaded up on every single one.
that's awesome.
An EQ
That's
and a
awesome.
compressor. They're turned off initially, but no matter what, my default tracks always have an EQ and a compressor on it.
That kind of brings us to the next point of consoles. That's like a huge, or just analog EQs. But we'll get to the consoles
Yeah.
thing. Something I love about consoles is they're already there. They're
Yep.
just put there. They're ready to go.
You just turn
And
it on.
yeah, and a lot of DAWs like Logic, they have it. You just click on it and it pops right up and it's
Yeah.
ready to go as well.
Yeah.
That's something else that it mimics the feeling of a console.
Yeah.
And something I don't like is when I'm saying like, I got to EQ something. So then you have to break your focus and go find the EQ, pull it
Mhm.
out of the list, load it up onto the track. And by then, somebody like me, I'm like, what was I even going to do? I have to
Mhm.
write it down on paper. So I think having them all available to you, ready to go, it's something that is helpful and very good.
Yes.
However,
Yes.
it can also work against you. I find in digital situations preloading things onto channel strips because then you'll find yourself using them just because they're there. So
Mhm.
as long as you can moderate and not use it just because it's there,
Yeah. Yeah.
or use it extremely subtly, I think that that's a very good.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why by default they're off. They're on the
For sure.
track, but they're off. So that
For
way
sure.
I can hear it without it actually affecting the track. And that's something I usually recommend to my students is like turn it off. And then if you need it, then use it. Because some people get into that habit of just using an EQ because it's there, because they think like, oh, I have to EQ it, right? Like I have to EQ everything. That's not necessarily true. It's more of a tool that gets used when you need it out of necessity.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Hey Jamal, want to hear a conspiracy theory?
What's that?
So they say.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if this is true, but I have heard that if you leave plugins off, they still change the sound of the signal. I don't know if that's true.
Okay.
Something to
Okay.
think about, guys. Could be true, could
Mhm.
not be true. Do your own test. Send us an email.
I'll do
Let
an
us
A/B
know.
test. Yeah.
highfrequenciespodcasts@gmail.com. Let us know.
Yeah. Yeah. Come to us with your conspiracies, your audio conspiracies.
For sure. Audio conspiracies.
Yeah.
All right. So let's kind of start talking about some analog EQs, some digital EQs.
Yeah.
What do you find yourself?
I actually, in terms of analog versus digital, I mostly right now because of the limitations of my money and just like where I'm working at, like I'm working in my apartment.
For sure.
For the most part, I'm using digital EQs. However, I use digital EQs that emulate analog EQs.
Awesome. Awesome.
So I'm kind of trying to walk between both worlds.
That's the best way.
And to me, there's kind of benefits, there's pros and cons to both analog and digital EQ.
For sure.
So for example, with a digital EQ, the world is your oyster. You kind of can do literally anything and everything you want. But that's kind of overwhelming, and that's one of the cons, is that like you can literally do anything with the EQ, and that's something that applies to all VSTs and all plugins. Like you can pretty much do anything and everything. But then with analog, there's just sort of because I even have a what is it? I think it's a Eventide EQ. That's an analog rack that I have down there. Or no, it's an Alesis MEQ. And that EQ, it's broken. Like one of the right channel doesn't work, so it's only mono. But that EQ, it's not a very good EQ, honestly, like just in my personal opinion. But it adds some sort of like character and color to the sound that you cannot get with a digital EQ, no matter how hard I try. There's just something to it. And it could be the way the electronics, the transistors treat the sound. It's just the way that it sounds that you cannot get out of a digital EQ. And that's something I think that applies to the whole analog versus digital debate.
For sure. Across the board, yeah.
Yeah.
Something I love about hardware EQs is they all have a very distinct sound, and they all, like you said about the inverse about digital, they all have very distinct limitations to them.
Yeah.
Whereas digital is limitless; you can do anything.
Yeah.
So I find myself where I use hardware EQs is a lot of my like distortion pedals and things like that I have for guitar. I try to find ones. Well, hopefully they have an EQ, some kind of an EQ built into them.
Yeah.
And any kind of a thing that I like to get, even like a synth has an EQ kind of in it, some type of an EQ. And
at a minimum, it has a filter. Yeah.
Yeah, that allows you to kind of change the sound to just sound different than other people who might have that same effect.
Yeah.
Another hardware EQ that I'll use a bunch, obviously, is DJ EQs on my DJ mixer. I'll be using that all the time in a similar way to mixing, to remove the bass of one track to make room for bass on the other track, and to remove the vocal and things like that. So you're just switching and balancing. And I just kind of like to think of channel A and channel B as a fulcrum, or the middle crossfader point as a fulcrum, and channel A and channel B as a balancing point that I have to kind of weigh a specific amount of frequencies on when I'm using that. And then the other type of hardware kind of EQs that I'll use often when I am using is built into a console, or something like small console or something like that. So you'll have the ability to just kind of make it sound better. That's just the goal that I try to go for. I don't try to do any crazy removing. I just try to make it maybe enhance something. Maybe it's too dark, I make it a little brighter, or something like this. Very simple, nothing insane. I'll do all the surgical things later on, and I'll typically do all of that with digital. Some kind of removing. So
I agree with that 100%. That's usually how I work as well. Like with digital EQs, I tend to mostly use them to correct issues in the sound. So like if something is too boxy or too boomy or is too sibilant or something like that, I'll use an EQ, or even like a dynamic EQ for sibilance. But when I'm trying to add something that I like to it, when I'm trying to add frequencies that I like, I tend to use an analog EQ or an analog emulating EQ in order to increase the saturation or the coloration in the sound. So that's something that I definitely do too.
And additionally, if you have a single piece of gear, like I know a lot of people listening might say, like, I only have one distortion pedal, or I only have one rack module, or I only have one. So the cool thing about, if it's not even an EQ, the cool thing, if it's a synth or it's something, is you can do it. Like, let's talk about guitar. You can record and do multiple takes, or even reamp a signal with different settings on the EQ. And this will give it a totally different sound you can use for layering. One could be in your face, the other could be reserved, and the other could be more mid-range, and this and that. And then you can build this entire awesome wall of like sound thing. And that's a really neat way to use a single piece of gear. And it's just using the built-in EQ if it has it.
especially when it comes to guitars. I feel like a lot more music producers know this than guitar players know. But the tone control on the guitar is an EQ. It's
Mhm.
essentially a shelving EQ, and it's also partly to the pickup switch, where you place the pickup switch, like whether it's on the neck, whether it's on the bridge.
That's like
Um,
an EQ as
it's
well. It's
basically
like,
an EQ. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
I
giving
mean,
you those different
microphones.
tones.
You could think of microphones, different microphones, as having different,
Frequency responses.
yeah. I mean,
So
different perceptions. And
yeah,
the perceptions is just filtrations, which is based upon EQ, right?
yeah,
We don't even hear things flat. We hear things filtered, or
yep,
hear things nonlinear.
yep,
So all an EQ is doing is giving us the ability to adjust the volume to make things sound a little bit more balanced, or to fit
yes,
things like a puzzle
yeah,
together to make a mix,
yeah.
or to
And
change the sound of things.
I wanted to kind of get into, there's kind of three main types of EQs, especially when it comes to analog.
Hmm.
And there's the shelving EQ, there's the parametric EQ, and then there's the graphic EQ. So the shelving EQ is kind of the one that we've been talking about the most, which is like the bass, mids, treble, like your typical like in-car EQ, or the DJ EQ, for example. And the shelving, this is more getting into like EQ shapes, but the shelving EQ, it will take out all the highs or boost all the highs, or pull out all the lows, or boost all the lows. And then that's kind of like the typical like 3-band EQ that you see is the shelving EQ. And that's kind of similar to what you'll see like on a guitar tone control, for example. But then the parametric EQ, that one is the one that you're talking about that's going to be on like the console. So it has a specific, I guess, set of knobs that are, you can adjust the frequency, you can adjust the gain, you can also adjust the bandwidth or the Q, and then you can adjust, well, I already said frequency, but you can also kind of switch between different EQ shapes. And then the last one, the graphic EQ, that's the kind that I have with the Alesis, what is it called? MEQ, the MEQ 230. That's the one that I have. That is a graphic EQ, and that's kind of like the entire frequency spectrum, where it's 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And that one's kind of like visually, you can see what frequency you're boosting across the entire frequency range. So yeah, that's the kind of the main three kinds of, especially when it comes to analog EQ.
For sure. And you'll
Yeah.
find a lot of those graphic EQs in like live installation clubs, preset
Yeah.
behind the plastic thing that they set so
Yeah.
the sound sounds good.
Yeah.
But for sure, when it comes to analog consoles, console EQs, this kind of a thing, I feel like I
Hmm.
feel like the EQ defines, in a sense, the sound of the console, and that is through its physical limitations and
Yes.
predetermined frequencies and bandwidths,
Yes.
or
Exactly.
the range that you can adjust. So something that sets apart the different SSL consoles, for instance, is just like the way that they sound as they were created through the different parts that they used over time, in addition to the different switches and the different ranges of the knobs. I know that one thing is the brown knob SSL EQ is different
Hmm.
sounding from the black knob 242 EQ, which the
Yes. Yeah.
brown knob was on the original SSL and the black knob being on the SSL E series. The black knob having the button for the bell curves on the bottom end, versus the pink knob on the SSL-G series that
Yeah.
came out in the 80s.
That's my
And that
favorite
has
one.
the multiplication. You can make crazy ranges of frequencies. You could do like 21,000 hertz.
Hmm.
It's got a lot
40,000
more
hertz on
range,
it. Yeah.
and the gain ports are deeper on it. So there's like differences to the consoles. And then the amount of bands that they have that an
Yeah.
EQ would have, and then the like Jamal had said, the filter shapes, or the what shape they are. Is it
Yeah.
a shelf? Is it a parametric? Is it a filter? And these kinds of things gives the sound of the console. Not
Yes.
to mention, you can see all of them at once on a console, which is
Yeah.
super helpful, because you could just look and say, "Wow, this one sounds too bassy. Let me turn down the bass over there," and you can work on two tracks at once if you wanted
And
to.
kind of, yeah,
So
kind of work them together.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
very cool. The visual part. and it's very cool. The haptic feedback feeling part of a console.
Yeah.
In that opinion, especially limitations. I love having hardware limitations because for somebody like me with like ADD, makes me more creative.
Yeah.
Not being able to do everything. If somebody's like, "Oh, you can only do this," then it'll be really creative and it'll be fun.
And you
But
know
if
what? There's sorry to interrupt,
no,
but
no, go ahead.
I think there's something that's kind of beautiful in having limitations,
For
especially
sure.
in modern times. I forgot what the concept is called, but it's basically when you have too many choices in front of you, you kind of get overwhelmed. It's like the like if you go in, for example, like I know you live in Brooklyn, like you can go into a store that's like a mayonnaise store and it's just hundreds of types of mayonnaise. There's like dill mayonnaise and garlic mayonnaise and this kind of mayonnaise. And you walk in and you're like, what do I get? Like what do I want to put on my sandwich? And you'll spend an hour looking through hundreds of different types of mayonnaise. But then if you go to the grocery store and there's like 4 types of mayonnaise, you're like, this one, all right, I'm out.
This one is on sale. This is the one.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And you're like, this is the one I'm going with. And I think when it comes to music production, a lot of people get stuck in that like paralysis of choice where they're just like, I have all these things that I could possibly do. And so you end up getting no music done, or you end
For
up
sure.
spending
My advice to
3
everybody
months
listening:
on one sound.
wipe your computer, reformat your whole computer, and then only install things as you
Yes.
use them. That's what I've done so many times. Like I have so many plugins, and if I had all of them installed, my computer, for one thing, probably wouldn't run, and for the second thing, I would not be able to find anything.
Yeah.
And it's cool to have like I have 10,000 or I have 100,000 plugins. Like who cares at the end of the
Yeah.
day?
No one,
Because
yeah.
I probably
No
use
one's
like
going to use
20
all
of
of
them.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like you only use put the ones that you use, and it's cool to have 48 synths, but I probably use like 5,
Yeah,
in my entire
exactly.
life. So use the ones that that helps you and it helps limit you.
Yeah.
And that's something that in the digital era, in the digital age, is super hard to find limitations. People even have to get that weird screen time thing to see how
Yep.
long you've been staring at your phone because
Mm-hmm.
we are so addicted to the infinity of digital.
Yeah.
So this is something that can help limit you is one that, and two, using kind of the analog style virtual analog plugins in a digital audio workstation. And this
Yes.
only gives you 3 options for an EQ or something.
Yes.
So it does contribute to that limitation.
Yes. And that's something too I've been trying to take into my own music. Not necessarily my like more electronic stuff, because I tend to like a more digital sound with electronic things. But I also have another moniker that's all lo-fi hip hop and just like lo-fi chill beats. And
Awesome.
so like it's me playing guitar and like playing piano, and it's kind of getting back to analog roots. And I have this tape machine that I've been using, and because of the limitations, there's only 4 inputs on it. So there's only 4 tracks that I can track onto at a time. So I have to end up doing that thing where it's kind of like the Beatles used to do, where you would have to bounce down onto another track.
Oh yeah, same. Yeah.
And so I
This
would
is
have to like record one take, get it right, and then record it again onto this tape so that I can have up to 8 tracks, and then I will record it into Ableton. And
that's
so like it's kind of intentionally giving myself those limitations.
sometimes that's the best way. I'm
Yes.
starting a metal band with my friend a long time, and I got a 4-track Tascam recorder with
Oh
only 2
yeah,
inputs on it,
nice.
and it
Yeah.
is like amazing because it's so limiting. It has nothing, and I'm
Yep.
only using that, and I'm
Yep.
just like, this is what I'm going to use to record. And it's great because when I have Ableton, I swear I would be like time stretching and like I'm going to shift this so it sounds on
Yeah.
point. It's like,
Yep.
nope, you can't do that in a
Can't.
multi-track.
Yep.
And not even an EQ. So having the limitations of not even having an EQ in my multi-track that I'm choosing to use for this project is I'm
Yeah.
using the amp, I'm using the pedals, I'm using something else besides something, and it makes me more creative. So
Yeah.
versus when I make dubstep, it's like whatever, anything goes, just make it sound good. That's kind of what I try to do.
Yeah.
Being in this is a whole new like you said, and it's great to, I think, have an analog project that forces you to be
Yeah.
creative and evolve,
Yeah.
and also go backwards to be where you started, if that's where you
Yeah.
started.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's kind of where I started. Like I'm sure, because like I'll say like 80s, 90s babies, we all remember where you're like sitting on the radio and you're trying to catch your favorite song on a cassette tape. So like right at the right moment, you're like, oh yeah, I got my song. And you would
Or a
make these like,
VHS movie. Yeah.
or yeah, or movies too.
Yeah.
Like I feel
Yeah.
like kids today they kind of miss out on the magic of that like analog, like I have to catch it right now because it's not gonna play for another 12 hours. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah. And you have the TV guy. Well, I used to have like TV
Yeah,
guide and
TV
record
guides.
movies and stuff all the time from
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And then and then I would record like skate videos as a kid and then take my
Yeah.
PlayStation and put a CD in it and record the soundtrack to the video camera through that way because it would play.
Yeah.
It's
I've
pretty
seen that.
weird, but
Yeah, PlayStation
that
2
that
used to be
that's
able to do
probably
that.
not how you do videos today. But it made
Yeah.
me feel cool then. And it's
Yeah.
like if you feel cool about your art, I think it helps you perform better and promote it better because you feel like it's a more solid product.
Yeah.
So be creative. Be
Yeah.
limit yourself. You know, go
Intentional
analog, do some
limitations.
stuff.
Yeah.
But
Try
also
it
be able
out.
to do digital because that's how you save the analog, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Is once you're like, this is great and I'm creative. After we record on that multi-track, I'm definitely gonna mix it and make it sound normal.
And use some EQ.
But it's the creative process that you're trying to get. It's you're
Yes.
trying to get something out that doesn't normally come out, and that only happens when you're stranded on a deserted island with 5 things.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, so let's go
All
to
right.
a break. Let's
Yeah.
jump to a break quick.
Yeah. Let's take a little break.
This podcast is sponsored by Psychosis Music, which is the project of my co-host Jamal Taylor. Psychosis is an artist off Bass Tap Records with a remix album coming soon. Jamal Taylor also specializes in mixing, mastering, and production for multiple genres, including pop, hip-hop, R&B, and electronic music. For inquiries, please email drpsychosis@gmail.com. That's drcykos@gmail.com. For more information, visit psychosis.net.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Appreciate that.
All right. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So welcome back. What we're going to be talking about for the rest of the show today, we're going to be talking about techniques, experiences, and some stories with EQ.
Yes.
So with some techniques, Jamal, what are some of your favorite EQing techniques?
My absolute favorite technique. This is something that I think you can do with almost any EQ. But more recently, I've been working with pop artists and more mainstream music, I'll say. It's not necessarily pop music because it's not really pop until it's popular. But I've been vocal heavy. That's what I'm working on, is music that's vocal heavy. And so mixing vocals is something that's very difficult to do. But in terms of EQing, what I've been doing is I'll have the instrumental and I'll have the instrumental on a bus on its own channel. So everything, like all the drums, the synths, guitars, everything, all bus to one thing. And I'll put like a master EQ on that. And then on my vocal, I'll put an EQ and I'll boost the frequencies that I like, that I want to pop through on the vocal. Then I'll copy that EQ onto the instrumental EQ and then set it to the negative 100% scale. And so what that does is it scoops out those frequencies where the vocal is sitting automatically out of my instrumental. And then on my vocal, I'll just turn that EQ off because now I don't need to have that boosted signal anymore. It just sits right on top of the instrumental and they mix together really well. And that's probably my favorite EQ technique right now. And instead of like individually doing it, I just do it on the whole thing.
That's a really cool technique.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. So for all you guys listening, give that one a shot. That's really cool.
Try it out.
So, something I like to do is I like to think of things as like stacking them on top of each other, or a sandwich, or not a sandwich with no bread on the top, maybe like a pile of things on top of a piece of bread. And what the bread would be in this case, or what the bottom piece would be the sub. So I like to think of things as the sub having the most content, and then what sits right above that, because the whatever element sits right above that. Now, keep in mind, when I'm mixing, which is when this would be taking place, I'm ordering everything by frequency. So I'm having all my low things together, kind of going from sub and building up all the way to the highest part, which is the metal or the cymbals.
Yeah.
So with this, I will be very, very certain not to filter. And what this means, you're going to have to filter at some point, but
Yeah.
not to noticeably filter. I'll do shiltering, or I'll do gentle tapering of the low end with a shelf, resulting into a secondary curve of a filter.
Yeah.
And then what I'll do here is I'll blend in that baseline, whatever baseline you have, whatever low frequency element you have, with the sub using shelving. Then
Mm-hmm.
right above that, I'll look at the next element. Now, the next element you might think might be another track, but it could actually be a parallel aux, like a send or a return.
Mm-hmm.
So let's pretend you're making dubstep and you've sent out your bass to a return track for processing, parallel processing.
Yeah.
So now I'll think, oh, wow, there's two things happening at once. The second thing is a duplication of this bass. There can only be one low thing if you're thinking of bread or whatever's on the bottom.
Yeah.
So I will go into that parallel process and I'll remove more than the actual sound feeding into it, which has less than my sub bass.
Yeah.
And I will continue this process until I reach the cymbals. Now, when it comes to that end, I'll start thinking about the top end. When it comes to, you don't want to leave too much. Okay. So a lot of people would say, a lot of people would be like, make it natural. We hear 20 to 20K. Well, I'm going to kind of blend a story in here.
Mm-hmm.
There was a point in my life where I really believed that. And I said, everything needs to have full frequency. So I didn't really care about that top end.
Yeah.
And when I remember one time playing one of my songs live, being like, this is great. And everyone, right as the riser came, I just saw people putting their fingers in their ears. Like it was like deafening. And this, I remember, taught me you should definitely take care of that. Yeah. So ever since then, I'm always like, all right, make sure you check out that high end. Make sure you don't make it, because it's deadly. It's painful. It's going to hurt people's ears, especially when it's really loud. Yes. So although a lot of people focus on that low end, like I just told you, it's so important to focus on the high end for applications where you're cranking it super loud. You don't want to damage people's ears. So I start thinking about that when I get up into the upper frequencies. And it's not really a technique, but it's sort of my workflow. And that's something that is in itself a technique. So that's
definitely. Definitely.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that's something too that I've learned from, because in the beginning, when I first started really being serious about music, I put out this EP called the Highs and Lows EP. And there's this one song that did really, really well called The Raptor. And it was heavy on the sound design. Like I did some really like interesting things with the sound design. But then in like the bridge section of the song, I was kind of just letting the sounds naturally be what they are. And they're even on like, I think on SoundCloud, someone commented like, thanks for fucking my ears up, or like, thanks for messing with my ears. And I was just like, oh yeah, probably not a good idea to just like leave in that like I think it's between like 3 to 5K where it's just like really piercing and just hurts your ears. So I tend to do this is more of a mastering EQ, but I tend to do a slight dip, like 1 dB, like just enough to just like pull back a little bit in that really sensitive frequency range. And in terms of like how I use EQs, other than the one I just showed you guys, I actually do that technique too, where you call it shiltering, where it's like you shelf and you filter. I use that technique a lot, especially when it comes to bass and distortion. So when you're distorting your subs, you tend to, because what distortion does is it adds in higher harmonics. It kind of tends to take away from those sub harmonics. So what I started doing was I'll have my sub channel, just a dry sub, and then I'll send it for parallel processing. And then on the parallel processed sound, I'll have the distortion channel, and then I'll have a shiltered EQ to pull away the super, super sub frequencies so that my sub still lives in that space. And then the distortion is kind of sitting on top of that. And the shiltering kind of pushes the tone of the distortion a little bit more into the higher frequencies. So there's no kind of issues with the pure sub that's coming through.
Yeah.
And then
that's a great technique.
Yeah. That's honestly like one of the kind of the ways, like we did 808s the last episode. Like that's kind of one of the ways that I process my 808s to get that really heavy, like thick distortion without actually destroying the intent of my sub.
Exactly. And that's something I like to tell people to think about is like a shelf is your blending filter or blending
Yeah.
band, if you want to think of it as that. And the filter is the removing band, like coffee and
Yes.
physics. So what that means is a filter is your blending and removing thing,
Yeah.
bands,
Yeah.
So that's something that you can really use um, to achieve that.
Yeah. Another kind of this is more on the DJ side of things. But I'm sure every DJ listening ever has made this mistake. But I was mixing I think I was playing a house set, like more like bass house. And I was playing a set and I had one song and I was mixing in another song. I got towards the end of the song and the songs were in key because that's usually how I DJ is that they are in key. So the bass line of the song that I was playing actually fit with the bass line of the song that I was mixing into. And so I pulled out the bass of the song that I was mixing into so that I could kind of ride out the rest of the song and kind of blend them together. And as it was playing, we start getting to the section where one song is ending, the other song starts going into the build-up. And as the song builds up, I start mixing out the last song. And then it comes to the drop of the next song, hit the drop, no bass whatsoever. And the whole club is just like no kick, no bass, no nothing. And I was just like, oh my God. And I had to just like scramble and just like crank up the bass in the last second. And then everybody was like, yeah. But like you could tell at first, like looking at people's faces, they were like, did something go wrong with the speakers? Like,
oh, we've all done that.
It's just so like in the moment, it's so embarrassing because you're like,
yeah.
oh my God, why did I just do this?
It's the best way to learn something.
Yeah.
I have a similar story. I was in a DJ crew. Shout out to Boombox Saints. Shout out to Deuce Leader. And I was we would get all these shows. We would get a lot of shows. There was 4 of us. We would split it up between us, and we just go take whatever club was available that night. So it would be packed all the time. And we're playing top 40 music. So we're playing whatever they want to hear. It doesn't matter. I played everything from pop to rock to country to hip hop to trap, you name it. So I was like, I'm going to make some top 40 remixes because this is going to be great. And I'm going to start playing my original music because I got like 600, I got like 1,000 people at these shows every night. I want to play my music and record it on a phone, and it's going to be so cool. I'm going to feel great.
Oh man.
So I get a bunch of songs that I had made, and this is before, so I started mastering them in big quotes, air quotes. And I went to go play them. Everyone's dancing, and I flipped to my song. That's totally packed club. Right as I flip to my song, everyone stops and just looks at me.
What?
And it was the worst feeling because it was not a good. It was not a look like, "Hey, this is great." It was a look like,
"What are you doing?
What has happened?
Oh no,
what has happened?" And I instantly, that was the quickest song I ever played. It would lasted about like 10 seconds, and I flipped to something else.
Yeah. That's one of those.
So that's how I learned to master is through just doing that until because I was like, I have tons of options, tons of time. I was playing shows, so I was like, I'll make a remix, and slowly, years and years. No, a while went by, and one day I remember nobody looked. And it was the best feeling ever. And I was like, then I thought, okay, everyone else experiences this every time they release a song.
Yep.
But that was my moment where I was like, okay, it helped me understand. This is the one thing, guys, listening. I think the best way to learn is to just fail. So you have a story about it. Fail miserably. And then get up and try again. And you're going to look dumb, but it's cool later because you have a story about it.
Yeah.
Like, look how dumb I looked. And then you feel a little better about it because now I can at least make it sound good enough to play. Then nobody will look.
That's one of those things too.
It's good.
Yeah, that's one of those things too that I'd share with my students all the time is like get up there and fail. Like just keep failing over and over and over. But the key is to learn from those failures. For example, you learn from your failure. And like I have a similar story to that too, where like this is something that especially in the beginning, or this is like 10 years ago, where I didn't really know how to mix, didn't really know how to master. Like I was pretty good at making music because I'd been making music for a while. But the issue was the mixing and mastering. It wasn't necessarily like the actual songwriting that wasn't very good. It was just the technical like quality of the music. So I would be DJing, I'd be out playing shows. I was playing a show at least once a week. Like in the very beginning, I was just like saying yes to everything. Whether it was free, whether it was paid, I was just like, yes, I'll do it. Yes. Like I just wanted it that bad.
Yep.
And so because I was playing so often, it gave me the chance to fail a lot. Like it gave me the chance to play a song that was not mixed or mastered well, watch the crowd stare at me like, what are you playing, dude? And then be like, okay, so that mix needs to be tweaked. Let me move to the next song. And over time, like I learned through the process of just trial and error of how to get a better mix and how to actually make it sound good in different clubs. Like if
I
it sounds
agree.
good on specific system, if it sounds good on this system, it sounds good in the car. And it's just over time, like doing that process, even though it is very embarrassing, I'm not gonna say that it was easy. Like there were some times where it was like I would get home and I would just be like, oh my God, like I feel terrible. Like this was just not a good show. Like my songs are terrible. Should I quit? Like, should I just stop and like get a job at Starbucks?
Those are the best. Those are the best
But
years
then,
of your life.
but then now that I look back, I'm like,
Yup.
I would not be as good as mixing and mastering now had I not been through that, where I'd just gotten
Exactly.
that like urge, like, no, like keep going, learn how to do it, learn how to do it right, and learn how to get it right. And then I would not be here now had I not had those list of failures beforehand. So yeah.
Even with streaming now, guys, you guys can get out there and you can
Yeah.
stream, and it's not like I mean, it's not the same as a show with people I mean, there are people watching and they're not staring at you, but
Yeah.
in some way they are. So it's
Yeah.
just cool. Get out there, play as much shows as you can. What helped me a lot is having residencies, is having the ability
Yeah.
to be part of a DJ crew that
Yeah.
got me shows and that put me out in front of people every night. Just
Yeah.
get in any possible way you can to be playing shows and to be getting out there and
Yeah.
failing as much as possible and
And
learning from those
especially in the
mistakes.
beginning, yeah. Especially in the beginning, just say yes to everything.
For sure.
Just try everything. As you
For
get a
sure.
little bit more experience and as you get a little bit more value in what you know how to do, then I say like start charging. Like start actually charging a real rate, like a rate that's kind of goes with what your skill set is. Like, for example, Carl Cox should be charging thousands of dollars to DJ. But like if you just started DJing a year ago, like you should be charging like 200 bucks. You know what I mean? Like you shouldn't be charging as high as some of the other people. But yeah, in the beginning, just do everything you possibly can. Like, for example, I think my first DJ gig ever was a high school talent show. And like I lugged cases of vinyl, like milk crates full of vinyl to like on the bus too. Like I had my mixer and my turntables in this backpack of mine. And then I got on the bus with two milk crates full of vinyl. And it had like Soldier Boy and like just like music from that time. And it was just like I was so happy too. Like I got there and they like walked me in and like it was really fun. Like we set up everything and like that was my first DJ gig. Like I spun vinyl at a high school talent show. I was like the host too. So like in between the acts, I'd be like talking and like making jokes and like scratching on the turntables. So like it was one of those things where like I look back on it, like while it was happening, I was super embarrassed and I was just like, oh my God, like what do I do? Am I doing this right? Like, is this going okay? And like I was drenched in sweat. But like looking back now, I'm like, that was like the ideal first situation to DJ in, like outside of my bedroom.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My
So,
first experiences with DJing, I was part of a DJ mobile service thing, and they
mhm.
sent me out to these weird birthday parties, and
Oh
I had to
yeah,
do
yeah.
with all my stuff. I was on CD players back then, doing CDs, and then I just went to clubs and I started telling them I was a DJ and I wanted to
Hmm.
play there. And it was like dead clubs. Like nobody was there. Like there was like two people that came the whole night.
Hmm.
And the club was like, we're not going to have you play here again. It was not like a good, cause
Okay, yeah,
I didn't know. I just failed. I was just like, at least I'm going to show up with my turntables and just, do
yeah,
what I can,
yeah,
do
yeah,
the best I can. It was not that bad, but
yeah,
nobody came. You know,
yeah,
I wasn't a promoter. So I think that that's the best possible places to get experiences. dead
Yep.
clubs
Yep.
or just not being
Or
afraid.
5 people are there.
If I had waited until I was good enough to perform, I would probably still be waiting.
Yep.
Like, because
Yep.
I'm still like in my head, like you're always going to be like, anyone could do this. I'm never good enough. That's part of, I think, if you feel that before you get on a stage, you belong on the stage. If you
Yeah.
feel nothing when you get on a stage, you shouldn't be on a
You should
stage.
not be there. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because that feeling, that turns into fuel. I feel
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
like, what if I mess up? That turns into fuel
Yeah.
of like, this is going to be great.
Yeah. There's
So
honestly like I've as a technician, like a playback technician, I've toured the world. I've been around the world with huge artists, and they will, before they go on stage, you can visibly see that they're nervous as well. Like it doesn't matter how many shows they've played, doesn't matter. They could have filled stadiums full of people, and they've been shown time and time again. Um, they get nervous still. They still get stage fright. Like it doesn't matter how big of an artist you are, you still get that same level of like a little bit of
rush.
fright. And it's just like, to me, that shows like you should be on stage. Like the fact that you're afraid, the fact that you're like, I could f this up, but I'm gonna do it anyways.
It's a free
Yeah.
rush. You get to get up on stage, and I love that rush. But I would, in some situations, if you're in a bad mindset, it could be horrific feeling. It could
Yeah.
be like,
Yeah.
because it's like being on a roller coaster. If you're like, if you were like really sick and you're throwing up and you like have a throwing up bug or something, and you're like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna get on a roller coaster. That would be the worst possible experience,
Yeah.
probably. Versus if you get on a roller coaster when you're normal, you'd
Yeah.
be like, well, that was really fun. So it's very similar, I think.
Yeah.
That rush is like, wow. And I think part of the reason a lot of people struggle with, you could call it stage fright or you could call it that rush, is getting into a good mindset beforehand.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
part of, and I think some of the best shows I've ever played in my life, I was like so angry before I went to play. And it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the rage just turned into like pure
Energy.
fuel for that night. Yeah. And then,
Yeah.
but other nights, being in a good mood, always be in a good mood, I think is the way to play, especially when you're a resident at a club. You don't want to get there and be in a bad mood. You want to like, and another thing, if you're a resident at a club, clean up your booth every night before you leave
Yes.
and
Oh
shake
my
everybody's
God.
hand
Yes.
goodbye. Say hi when you get there. Don't overuse your drink privilege. Don't get
Yes.
drunk. There's
Yeah. Don't
there's
get
like
hammered every night.
there's like protocol. It's a
Yeah.
job, but I think that that's important too.
Yeah. I mean, one thing too that you said I think is really important, and it's maybe something that I don't practice as much as I should, but like just the simplicity of cleaning up at the end of the night, like
For
put all
sure.
the cables away, like make sure you pack everything where it's supposed to go. Like just taking that little bit of extra time makes your life easier, so much easier the next day. Because say for example, you're really nervous and you can't find the cable you need. Now you're doubly nervous because you're like, I can't find this one cable that I need to DJ. Like, oh my God, this is going to make my life so much harder. And then now you're thinking about that instead of like, what's my first song going to be for the set? What am I going to mix into? So your mind kind of starts to stray off from where it should be if you don't have that kind of thing together first. These are just
I
like small
fully agree.
tips. And that applies
For-
to studio work too. Like it's not just
For
the
all you
DJ.
guys listening, have a life box in your DJ bag. And what the life box is like a box for emergencies.
Yes.
Everything I keep in my life box, put screwdrivers in there, put Advil, put Tylenol,
Yes.
put a Tums in there, put something edible that you can eat in there,
Yep.
put a bottle of water
little
in there,
Cliff
put
bar.
every cable,
Yeah.
every adapter, anything, phone charger,
An extra
anything,
USB with your set on it.
anything you can physically think of, put it in that box, and then just put it in your bag, put it in the basement of the club, do something like that.
Yep.
And no matter what happens, you have that emergency box to go to, and
Yep.
that will take away all of your problems and worry, and then you can focus on the set.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just my advice.
Good tip. That's a good veteran tip right there. That's like, yeah, dude.
Well, so when it comes to digital application of EQs, some of the techniques I find myself using, back on the topic.
Yeah,
of
yeah,
EQ,
yeah. Let's get back to
is
EQs.
is I find myself, after we've recorded, after we've done all of the possible things we can, and keep in mind, when I'm recording, I might use an EQ built into the piece of hardware as a tonal enhancer to make it sound the way I want, or
Yeah.
as something to make it sound different from another take I did, or we've discussed this already. Then what I'll do is I'll take these recorded stems and I will apply digital EQing to them. And the goal being to clean. The
Yeah.
goal being to clean up. So when people are recording, or even I'm mixing or mastering their projects for them, I'll get a lot of people saying like, "Hey, what should I do when I'm recording? Should I record with an EQ? Should I record with this, with this?" And I'm saying, it doesn't
No.
matter if you have a bad mic. It doesn't matter if you have an untreated room. It doesn't matter what you have. Find a way to record as much as you can of yourself, but not the air conditioner and not other things. So
Yeah.
if you're able to record 100% of yourself, I'm able to take away things I don't want or shouldn't belong in the mix or I see fit. And that is something that I feel is in the mixing process and the mastering process is the digital application for EQ. You can still use analog EQ to additively boost things, which you should. But before that, I would 100% be in the role of cleaning, the cleaning mindset, and use
Yeah.
reductive EQing for things like notches to remove resonance or just to not remove, but just to soften or diffuse the resonance. I'll be using filters to remove content that's unnecessary. And I'll be using additive boosts to kind of boost things and highlight things
Yeah.
to stand out in the mix.
Yeah.
What about you, Jamal? What are you using digital EQing for?
That's mostly what I use digital EQing for, is removing, using subtractive EQing, like you said, to kind of scoop out the parts of a sound that I don't like. One technique though that I see a lot of people touting on like YouTube and even in like tutorials and things like that, people who really know what they're doing, is I feel like people overuse the technique where you boost a specific frequency and you tighten the bandwidth and then you try to sweep through all of the frequencies in a sound. And then you're like, oh, that frequency sounds bad, let me cut that. Oh, this frequency sounds bad, let me cut that. This frequency sounds bad, let me cut that. The issue with that is if you tighten the Q on an EQ and you boost it, it's going to sound bad. That's just, it
For sure.
automatically is going to sound bad. So that technique to me, I think is a little bit overused. So what I do when I'm looking to cut out something is I listen to the sound with no EQing on it whatsoever. And I just kind of, in my own perception of what I hear, I try to listen to the sound in context with the rest of the song. And if it sounds good, if I can hear it clearly and it's not masking other sounds, then I'll leave it alone. Even if by itself, it doesn't sound very good. Because I'm not trying to make like a good kick drum sound. You know what I mean? I'm trying to make a good mix down. I'm trying to make an entire mix that sounds balanced and sounds great. Even though sometimes it may be that the kick isn't super punchy or the kick isn't super boomy. And maybe by itself, the kick may sound kind of weak. But in terms of how it sounds overall in the whole mix, then maybe that's the right kick. That's the way the kick should sound in context. And I think that's one thing to take away from, especially with EQing, is you don't necessarily need to make that one sound great by itself while it's soloed. You have to make the sound good in context with everything else. So sometimes that means not pulling out sounds, or sometimes it means like just adding a frequency and leaving it. So yeah.
Agreed. On the flip side, you can use that incorrectly, I would think it would be, to just open up the bandwidth of something like that, like Izotope, where you can hold Option or one of the buttons and then you can just isolate a sound in a multi-timbral sound source, even like a vocal. You could just isolate the words and find what is the important information. Or in things like a drum loop, you could just isolate the tom drum or the snare drum, and you could find where it exists and what other parts you can remove without turning down all the EQ knobs and then like doing it that way.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that's the way that it's intended for. It's probably just intended for whatever way you use it. Point of it is, there's a flip side to it.
Yeah, that's one thing too. That's another way I use digital EQs. I have the because I use Izotope as well, but I have the FabFilter series.
Great company.
FabFilter, the Pro Q is just phenomenal. I think they just came out with the Pro Q3. I don't have that yet, but I have Pro Q2. And
Pro Q3 is great.
Yeah, and I think you hold Command and it has this like little headphone cue thing, and you can isolate the frequencies that way. I do it that way sometimes too to find it, because the FabFilter EQ is so surgical that
Oh,
you
I
can
know.
really, really dial in and just like, and it's one thing too with digital EQing that I like as opposed to analog EQing is what's called transparency, or some people
For
will call it
sure.
honesty, where it's like you don't hear the EQ. And that may sound weird to some people, but not hearing the EQ means that the sound gets to be the sound. And the EQ is really just removing the thing that doesn't sound good and not touching the sound. And that's
For
one thing I
sure.
like about digital, like surgical sounding EQs.
Fab Filter, especially. Shout out to Fab Filter. They're a great
Yeah.
company. All their stuff is super transparent, super clear. The people who
Yeah.
work there are really great.
Yeah.
I think uh, they apply a lot. They give you a lot of bands. They give you 24 bands
Yeah.
in the Fab
Yeah.
Filter. It's like ridiculous
It's
the amount of
ridiculous.
EQing you can
Yeah.
do. Uh, but even that in itself is a sort of limitation. It's not an infinite bands. Typically, guys listening, there's maybe like 8 to
Eight.
12 bands in
Yeah.
an EQ, maybe four, I don't know, 4 to 12 bands in a digital EQ.
Yeah.
But this one has 24, and it's really good for crazy surgical stuff. It's good for
Yeah.
production, and you really can't hear it unless you enable specific
Intentionally.
options to
Yeah.
hear it. And
Yeah.
it's very cool because by default, it's hard to get plugins that don't make a sound. And you
Yeah.
might say, I want it to make a sound, but not if you're taking things away, as we were talking about in this, and
Exactly.
reducing
Yeah.
things. So I do commend Fab Filter for that. There's a lot of other companies out there. There's a lot of companies like Waves, and they
Yeah.
make a lot
Waves
of
makes
plugins
great
that are
things
good
too.
for adding things. And
Yeah.
additionally, they make digital applications as well. When it comes down to it, guys, the most important thing to know, less is more. Don't overdo it,
Yes.
because a lot of people overdo it because of
Yeah.
the range on the gain and the range of the frequencies, and they want to add all 24 bands because Fab Filter has 24 bands. What it comes down to is less is more. Moderate your behavior with an EQ and just try to make it sound natural. And in doing so, you'll create your own signature tonality, your own little audio flair on this sound that's going to sound cool and different from everyone else without even trying. And
Yeah.
how you achieve that is just try to make it sound natural,
Yeah.
and try using the gear that you know and that you own.
Yeah. And one thing too, I think going along with that, with not taking it too far, is take time with it. I think a lot of people want to just like do it and then move on to the next thing. Like just sit there with the sound for a while and just kind of adjust the parameters and really take the time to critically listen to what you're changing. And just take the time to just sit there, hear it, listen to it soloed, listen to it in the mix, make sure that it's really doing what you want it to do, and then move on to the next thing. Because I think a lot of people, especially in modern times, because you can do things so quickly, people just move on to the next thing and they're just done. But you can really, really push a sound if you just sit there with it for 10 minutes and just mess
Don't
with
take
it.
too long.
Don't take too long. That's why I'm saying 10 minutes, not 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Just 10 minutes of tweaking and just sitting with the sound and really enjoying it, and then move on. Like moving on is still important. Like you
It's very
definitely,
important. If the sun
you
goes
have to
down and
move
comes
on.
up, it's been too long.
Yeah, exactly. Usually I actually started doing this recently where I give myself 30 minutes and I'm like, I have this list of tasks that I have to complete on this track. I'm going to give myself 30 minutes. I'm going to get through as many of these tasks as possible. Then I'm going to get up and like go to the bathroom or like walk somewhere or just like move in general. And then I'll come back to it later. And so that like 30 minutes gives me the time to really sit down, focus in, get something done, and then stop.
That's awesome.
Or move on to a different track.
I try to do 10 minutes every 50 minutes. So that makes an hour. So it's like
Yeah.
50 minutes, take a 10-minute break, 50 minutes, take a 10-minute break.
Yeah.
It's something I like to try.
Yeah.
But all right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast.
Yes.
Next episode is going to be great. Get ready for it. We're going to have some awesome stuff for you. If you have any questions, any comments, any suggestions, feel free to reach out to us. highfrequenciespodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Additionally, you can also send us your mixes. If you want to know information about something you're doing, if you want some help with some sounds you're creating, some masters that you've made, anything, send us an email.
Yes.
We'll talk about it on the show. You will have some interviews here too soon, so get ready for it, and it's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. This podcast is also brought to you by the Garnish Music Production School. If you guys liked what you heard during the podcast and you want to know more, sign up today for a music production class and receive 5% off with the code HIGH. That's HIGH.
All right.
Yeah.
Definitely check out Garnish. It's a great school.
Yeah.
All right. We will see you guys next week.
All right. We'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.
All right.
Yeah.